Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/Security Weekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Make sure you attend RSA Conference February 24th through the 28th this year. SecurityWeekly.com/RSAC 2020. We got a discount code for you if you'd like to sponsor an on-site interview, or we're doing live shows from RSA. If you'd like to sponsor a segment on there, please go to SecurityWeekly.com/RSAC 2020. Our discount code will save you $150 off if you are attending.
That's a disco code? Wow. Is there a colored ball?
Did I say disco code?
Yeah,
Yeah, I heard disco code.
Well, come to our in Broadcast Alley and we'll have a disco. How about that?
We're going to have a disco
We have
ball.
a strobe light and everything.
The strobe light and everything, yeah. Now on to the security news for this week. Actually, segueing off our little conversation during the break, a Russian disinformation is an ongoing problem, according to the FBI chief.
No.
No way.
I thought we were talking
Say
the
it,
news
so.
stories.
Right? But so I don't understand what the call to action here is. Is it just stating the obvious? I mean, what's interesting is that the Russians were meddling in Ukrainian elections way before they were meddling in U.S. elections, and probably will continue to meddle not just in our elections, but any other country they don't like. That's their MO now, is they're just going to meddle with your elections just to promote whoever they like the least, or dislike the least, I should say.
Or they're doing it just because they can. Why not?
I don't know about that. There's an agenda.
I mean,
there's always an agenda with
at the end of the day, though, like if you're looking at their multi-phased attacks, why wouldn't you be hitting that particular? You're hitting your financial, you're hitting your political, and then you're hitting your critical infrastructure or kinetic. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I would be disappointed if they didn't.
But at the same time, you got to think that we're doing the same things. Just because we hear about the Russians doing it, when you see these huge protests in Hong Kong or protests in Venezuela, do we really think that our government doesn't have any kind of hand in that kind of thing, whether it's just some kind of disinformation that kind of goes out, or people in the field getting people riled up?
We would never do that.
No.
We're good people. We're different.
Right.
I don't dispute
American exceptionalism, right?
I don't dispute that. But, some of the interesting things are, like, in the Ukrainian protests during their elections, it's reported that the Russians put IMSI catchers in the streets and were sending people text messages to go home.
DEF CON was canceled.
Right?
Interesting.
That's kind of shady. Not even kind of shady. Yeah. That's shady.
All's fair.
Right?
In love and Cold War.
Way with the
How
water can.
else would you do it?
Right? How else do you disperse the...
So
Water
I'm
can.
really interested in Jeff's opinion here, because I believe that what we're seeing in today's world with the advent and the advances of the technology that we have is really just an amplification of what Russia's intent has been for probably 60, 70 years against the West. So, Jeff, go.
Nice try, John.
I can neither confirm nor deny. I think that makes sense, Jeff. I mean, I thought you were going a different place. I mean, we used to call it propaganda. It's just taken a different form these days. But I think
you were the one that told the account of Russians or someone flying planes and dropping off paper flyers of disinformation campaigns. Well, I don't know if that was you or someone else, but
that kind of stuff is going on for a while.
That's what I'm saying. Well, that's what Jeff is saying, right? Like,
yeah.
This has been the...
I mean, this is just a new medium. It's a new technology gives everyone the ability to do disinformation and propaganda in a different way.
Yeah. So
I mean, but there's different levels. There's disinformation, like going on social media and telling lies, right? Then there's information disclosure, like hacking the DNC and disclosing and leaking information to support a particular political view. But then there's actually meddling with the votes. And those are three different things, in my opinion.
But also when you talk about...
For the same goal, but three different tactics, let's say.
But my point was the intent has not changed.
Correct.
I agree.
Right.
My point was there was always an intent. The ability to actually execute is what has changed.
Capabilities.
Well, I think there has been a subtle change, Joff, and this is strictly my opinion, but throughout millennia, nation states and fiefdoms and whatever you call it throughout history, they mostly have gone after land gain. The way you increased your wealth and increased your power is by increasing your geography, often to get mineral resources and things like that. So I don't see necessarily wholesale border changes these days, but from an economic perspective, going after economic resources, the motivation perhaps, or the end game, has changed a little bit. The overall goal is conquering the world, but I think there's been an acknowledgement that it's or a recognition now that that's done more on an economic playing field, and that can take many different forms. Gaining wealth on your own or inflicting the loss of wealth against your adversary.
Right.
And there's no shortage of tactics to do that, such as changing the screen brightness to covertly transmit data, in case you missed that story. Because if you read the mainstream cybersecurity media, everyone drink, this story was covered on just about every news outlet. And I'm not sure it warranted that level of coverage, although, I could see it being used in highly targeted attacks, but there's also some luck. Like, you got to have a camera within a certain proximity of the screen of the system that you've compromised in order to change, was it like the red pixel, which then you can then download the footage and analyze it and decode it, but it's also super, super slow. I don't remember what the speeds were.
Yeah, you're talking about demodulating an algorithm. So if I remember right, they're using ASK for the algorithm, and that's just switching a bit either high or low based on like the pixels in which you're looking at. So you're just taking the amplitude of the wave and you're shifting that.
Right.
So that's going to be super freaking slow.
It's the definition of a covert channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Covert channel definition is always like to interfere or to modify some very small part of a protocol to transmit your information. It may and the delta between the amount of information transmitted versus the essentially the efficacy rating has always been a wide delta because it's covert for a reason. You look at who produced the research around this, right? So you can kind of make some inferences about one, the goal, kind of who the target is, and it's not anything new. We've seen this back in with AirHopper, or I'm trying to remember the other one that used CCTVs and the night vision stuff.
Oh yeah, so, there's been a steady stream. Where did this research come from?
Israel.
Okay.
So a lot of these, when you're talking about air gapping, right, and you're talking about jumping air gap, especially with something like this, the typical target is going to be ICS environments, right? You have very specific design requirements and very specific information that comes in and doesn't usually leave.
Right.
So in order to, for instance, like something like Stuxnet or Trident, they have to jump that air gap because there's specific regulation around it, and there's not going to be that information exchange or ability to attack those. Well, they're getting more connected now, but you're having to rely on these novel attacks that are very, very slow to either get information in or get information out. And it's usually a staged attack. This is probably years in the making where we're going to see this leveraged in some sort of staged attack that requires a very specific execution to get to the next stage.
the next Ukrainian power outage, this is how they will get.
The Ukraine does tend to be the proving ground.
It does. Apparently
many
so,
things.
right? For many things. I mean, they're in there right now, like moving their cameras away from their monitors, right?
Oh yeah, there's an entire policy being written about what kind of monitors and refresh rate and colored gammas they can actually run.
Right.
Everything
And
have the high contrast.
And they're banning Phillips Hue smart bulbs because another Israeli company,
Unpatched
conceivably
Phillips Hue
from
light
Checkpoint Research Labs. This one was what I found interesting, and I don't know if you guys looked at this, but the way I understand the attack is you got to have a bulb that's vulnerable. You got to be in proximity of the bulb. And then you have to upload your own firmware to the bulb to take control of it.
Yep.
And then you have to make it do weird things, air quotes, weird things, so that the user gets frustrated and disconnects the bulb from their hue, says, forget about this bulb, and reconnect. In that reconnection process, the bulb then talks to the hub, the Philips Hue hub, and downloads the firmware from the bulb onto the hub, and then there's a payload that executes on inside the firmware of the hub that then they used Eternal Blue to compromise a Windows system, which, I mean, you could have set the bar a little higher, but
It's cool.
what I
There's
didn't
easier
see
ways
it.
to adjust the lighting for some mood. You know, maybe you don't even need the lighting. I don't know, but
But my thing
that is pretty novel.
yeah, why wasn't it persistent access to the Hue hub that creates a command and control channel? So then I want to be able to upload any payload and spray it out to the network. I don't know if there's limitations in this particular attack so that it could only like execute something once. But it basically, they said it scanned the network and executed Eternal Blue, and that's great. But like, what if they I mean, what if they patched for it? We can all laugh at that. But
I bet there was a limited number of bytes that the firmware upload could have, so they probably had limited capability based on that.
But why not put a staged uploader in there if you need it to be small?
Because the function, the pairing function, and how it actually does the connection. Once it's connected, a lot of these will use both like an access point. It'll stand up in order to begin the setup process. But there's only some of those functions are limited to after a specific action. So after a reboot, because you're not going to be sending that across that buffer space. It's going to have to be in a particular boot up mode, where perhaps there's a bootloader that's then looking for something. Similar to how you do like a Pixie boot with a Pixie boot uploader or a BIOS update.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if it only downloads the firmware for the bulb the first time it connects, so that it then, I don't know why it would need the whole firmware, but it knows what version it's running. Because, I mean, I run Philips Hue at home, so if a bulb's firmware is out of date, the hub tells you, and then you can go update it and push out new firmware to your bulb. So it must keep track of that firmware on all your
why wouldn't it just grab like the first 8 bits or the memory address location in the case of something like one of the EEPROMs or SPI chips that's sending that up?
Oh, to get the version number.
I mean, not to be a complete Luddite, but I find it completely perverse that my light bulb has firmware. I mean, whiskey tank oxide.
Once you've got a bulb that you can control 16 million colors and program, Joff, you're like, yeah, if it has firmware, that's fine, because it's so awesome.
Paul is
only if I
So if anybody wants to target Paul,
that's it.
he may have Philips Hues in his house.
We covered a story years ago, the interesting attack vector you could now execute with this research from Checkpoint is you put the dropper in your code that's distributed for your bulb in a drone, right? And you fly your drone to a really populated like apartment building or something in a densely populated city, right? And you just have it hover, and then you compromise everyone at that level, and then maybe you lower it down, and you compromise everyone at that level, and you just fly around the city and hack into everyone that way. That would be, cool, but not cool in that sense.
That adds all
like a
new meaning
research
to the
project.
dropper, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Until someone shoots down your drone, then game over.
I
And
can
you have
see
anti-shoot down drone guns.
Right?
I can see a future where people will be pulling out their 12 gauge and aiming it up at drones.
But except now this is a tie into another great segue into a story. Tesla mobile eye autopilots are duped by phantom images that are projected by drones. So the drone and I don't know how this works. I want to know how this works because this sounds really cool, but it sounds like science fiction. It projects an image of a person, like in the road, just so that the Tesla camera can see it, and you can make automated vehicles swerve to a certain point or see a road sign.
It sounds very James Bond,
right?
It sounds very Spider-Man Far From Home.
Right? They've got a video that is on YouTube.
Well, if you're in a Tesla, one of the things that I thought was interesting, where it can see the dotted line on the highway and it knows to stay in between them.
Correct.
But what happens if there's another dotted line in the middle of the road?
What happens if the person painting those lines was really drunk at the time? Or a drone is projecting a new dotted line and veering you off course. That's what they say in the paper.
Yep.
Towards the president's motorcade.
They're relying very, very heavily around, you're going to drink, but they're relying heavily around some ML and algorithms in which they've programmed those decision-making and understanding of what a line looks like, what a road looks like, what an image looks like, and then depending on the type of cameras, right, like we know from being able to spoof Face ID stuff, if you're using a 2D camera, perhaps, and not some of the more depth perceptive IR cameras, then you're going to run into some troubles like this. Obviously, there's reasons for doing that when you're taking in a large amount of data and trying to parse it, and you're looking for specific things. But obviously, this would be where an image is going to fool something, regardless of how it's projected to the camera.
Mm. It's interesting.
Yeah, so it's it also reminds me of the interesting problem of AI on the road, drink everybody. But you look at automated driving vehicles, and their biggest problem is not the fact that they don't have the capability of being able to detect objects and do the right things. Their biggest problem is that humans are unpredictable. And that in an environment where things do not act the way they ought to act, they're never going to actually be able to develop sophisticated enough algorithms to actually deal with it. Now, if the entire road system becomes completely AI driven, all of the algorithms will be simplified and everything will be beautiful, except when you have a drone projecting the image of a human on the road.
Mm. But yeah, it's interesting how you talk about that the humans are the problem here. Down in Rhode Island here, we have an autonomous vehicle shuttle that just kind of over a couple of miles, it drives itself and it picks people up, drops them off. And there was a news article about it, how it's been in 4 accidents so far, which of course you're like, well, of course it's this driverless vehicle. It's going to get into accidents. No, it got hit by drivered cars 4 times. It was not at fault any time.
The root cause was not the vehicle itself.
Right. It was humans hitting the autonomous vehicle.
That's it.
From their cars, yeah.
Very interesting.
And on to the next story, Paul.
I wanted to talk about the CDP vulnerability.
Oh my God, there's a CDP vulnerability?
Again? Those of us that have been around for a while.
I think all of us got a story about that.
Right?
Yeah.
This is not the first time. I didn't go back in history and look, but I feel like this is not the first time this has happened.
No.
No, right? I'm not crazy, right? In any case,
well, they've kept expanding CDP in the capability realm, so the fact that it doesn't bring on more vulnerabilities would be a real surprise.
Well,
right?
no, I mean, here's what makes it vulnerable. It says CDP is a proprietary data link layer protocol. So there you go, proprietary protocol, developed by Cisco Systems. I'm not saying that necessarily makes it vulnerable, but in 1994. So I mean, that's before I think security was as paramount as it is today. And is used to share information about other directly connected Cisco equipment, including the operating system version and IP. It wants to share information. I mean, this is just CDP has been a recipe for disaster.
I was going to say, CDP's
without
been,
even reading
been used and abused for years, right? Mm-hmm. Like even like Yersinia, which is a very, very old application that still works really well.
Oh, wow. We're going back in time, Tyler. I didn't even think you were that old, dude.
Look, guys, I'm not even going to read the article, and I'm going to predict the vulnerability. You tell me whether I'm right or wrong. The vulnerability is that CDP is able to determine which VLAN the network port ends up in and thus circumvents internal network segmentation.
Traversing through an organization's switching routers to gain additional access.
I think,
Joff,
I
if
think
you go to armis.com/cdpwn.
I think that's Tyler's link. If you find Tyler's.
Oh, okay. Did Tyler link to it directly?
Yep.
Scenario 1, breaking of network segmentation is pretty much the what Joff just described.
Wow, nailed it. Okay, because I've lived CDP and I have engineered networks and I've told everybody turn the fucking shit off. Pardon language.
Right.
How come you didn't
sadly,
write an article?
that was the my recommendation
like,
too. I mean, you hate to be the office of no in security, but when you looked into CDP, you were like, yeah, you know what? Just turn that off.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, but you look at VoIP. VoIP is where your phones are, your network's most exposed. It's in public areas. It's at reception desks. It's usually isolated on its own VLAN. And what's the first thing you have to do in that attack scenario? You hop a VLAN. And first place you go is CDP.
The fundamental flaw is that CDP has basically handed some control back to the client device. And then when you do that, game over.
Now, one of the issues I have with some of the marketing is that they said, well, Armis found a 0-day vulnerability in Cisco products. I'm like, wait a minute. You did a coordinated disclosure with Cisco. I'm like, maybe it was a 0-day from the point that you discovered it until the point that you told Cisco about it. I agree. Then it's a 0-day vulnerability. But you also didn't announce it publicly. I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting curmudgeon-y because Jeff's been here all week. And mincing words of what a 0-day vulnerability really means, but I don't. Semantics.
Is it 0 day or O day? Is it 0 day or O day?
Is it a 0-day vulnerability or is it a 0-day exploit? No. Can we not have that? We shouldn't be having that debate now.
Let's not go to Jeff versus Jeff.
An M day, like the next day for your next day releases. So
that's like a 1 day.
I think 0 is appropriate.
More to the point, why the fuck has Jeff been there all week?
Because people just like to come hang out. Yeah, you guys are welcome to come and hang out with us.
I do more than one show, Joff.
No.
And then once I'm up here, I might as well stay here.
Right?
It's a fun place to hang out. Can we have a change of pace story?
Yeah.
So somebody pointed this out to me while I was at ShmooCon this past weekend, and I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but my story number 1 is the sculpture, the artist that did the Kryptos statue that's in the courtyard of CIA headquarters.
Your story number 1?
My story number 1.
Yeah.
This sculpture holds a decades-old CIA mystery, and now another clue.
I'm refreshing.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Oh, there we go. So the guy that made this thing 30 years ago is now 74 years old, and he's finally released. Not yet, Johnny. Thank you. Too late. Well, Paul wasn't looking, so that's
wasn't.
okay.
I was looking at you.
So he made the statue, and it's got 4 hidden messages in it. 3 out of the 4 were decrypted relatively early. The last message has been daunting for 30 years, and he's over time revealed clues to try to help people along, and he just dumped another clue about the underlying message to try to help people solve the puzzle, because he really wants to see it solved before he kicks, basically. So the article number 1 mentions that it was solved by NSA many, many years ago, which is my article number 2, which is not technically a new article. It's an old article that talks about how NSA cracked it way, way early on because a group of cryptanalysis interns were down there and saw it and copied all the data and took it back to NSA. Now, Johnny, and I can tell you, I was one of those interns.
I was going to say, that you were one of those interns.
Yeah. So this is I've saved this all these years. You can see the timestamp on it.
This is declassified now.
This is declassified.
Gotcha.
But these are the 4 messages, the 4 ciphers, and it's actually the 3rd one down that has never been broken.
Interesting.
And he's given a significant clue this time that hopefully will lead to solution. And I remember when I was there on the field trip, they said that while there's a sculpture here, like the whole courtyard has other stuff going on, and the message is not simply these 4 messages that are enciphered. They're supposed to lead you to an ultimate solution. So
it has to do with some other physical artifacts.
Yeah, there's other artifacts
right.
there, like, and it was a long time ago, but I remember there was like a little pond or something with a Roman column kind of laid, fallen down on its side in one area. So there's something, which probably has something to do with Caesar or something like that. So,
right.
So there's an overall message. Hopefully now
So the third one's just a Caesar cipher, is that?
No.
It's not that
I don't
easy,
think so,
right?
because there's been a lot of people trying to solve it
for 30
a long
years.
time. And part of the problem is it's so short. It's hard to figure out what it is. So if you're a crypto hobbyist or a professional, be on the lookout. There's a third clue out, which hopefully will lead to solution of this puzzle.
That's pretty cool.
It is kind of cool.
Very nice. Very nice.
I wish I had something worthy enough to follow that, but
I know, right? I mean, look, Jeff dangling like mysterious carrots.
right? And in a cipher that hasn't been broken in 30 years,
right?
Roughly, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, we could go sort of down the Captain Obvious gutter path with the Ashley Madison breach data is now being used for extortion. Who didn't see
hasn't
that?
it
That's a
always
good
been?
segue.
That's a good
Who would have known? Who would have known?
Surprised it took them that long.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would think that would have happened a lot faster.
I thought it already was
well,
happening.
There were
It's
cases
been
of
nice
that, right?
knowing
This
you.
is apparently a mass and kind of strategic use of this data by a different group. So I guess someone realized that there's still value there.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, my story number 7 is kind of a lightweight one, but I was thinking about how many times we get asked for help on security, and there's an article that basically lists 5 simple things on the home router setup that will reduce the likelihood of compromise. I mean, they're not super sophisticated. They're things like, making sure you're using strong encryption for your Wi-Fi, you don't have it open, a
Change
few
your
other things.
default password.
Yeah, and it, but I just was thinking about how many times people ask us, "What can I do to be better?" And I'm thinking, well, here's a reference. Use it. Do these things. You'll be a good step up. And they're nicely explained. They're not. They back off on the geek speak, which I'm guilty of going way too deep into and losing people. I know none of the rest of you are.
It'll be nice when we reach a point where we don't have to have articles like this, where people have to actually get in and secure their own routers and devices.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Right?
Well, some of the things I was reading the manual on MiFi access point they wanted approved for purchase, and it read like they weren't configuring it secure by default. You had to turn it on. I'm like, what the hell? Why is that not? Why don't they pick the secure options to begin with? They're giving the users a password. They don't have to worry about the fact it's WPA2 or not.
Because it's too hard to use.
Yeah, I guess. I'm just saying, why don't the vendors start there?
Because of compatibility with older cards, right? And then it doesn't work,
Yeah.
and then they're calling support.
Yep.
Hey, Paul, I know you mentioned
Are we
this.
going to talk about sabotaging with ransomware?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
really?
Paul, this was near and dear to your heart.
Wait, before you leave that topic, I actually want to do a little bit of a plug. I wrote a blog for Black Hills some time ago called 10 Ways to Protect Your Online Digital Life. This was published in 2016. But frankly, it's 10 generalistic ways that you can make your online digital life better. And I think it's still got relevance, today and hopefully further forward, right? So, yeah, check it out.
You should add the link to the wiki, Jeff.
I just threw it in the Slack, so if somebody could add that.
Oh, there it is.
Link
Yeah.
to the wiki.
I'll add it.
Well, you're doing your best Tyler imitation now.
Yeah.
I can't do the stories myself. Let me
But
give
you just
18
reminded me, one of the
stories.
things, before we keep going, one of the things that we struggle with at Black Hills often is that people think that when we write a blog, we need to make it really neat and really technical. And I came up with this one, and I actually called up John. I said, look, I'm going to do something that's really generic. It is not leet. It is not technical. It is basically advice to the public. This is what you ought to be doing. And I think it's got traction. And it's still, they're just general recommendations about your online digital life. And it's useful stuff.
Cool. Oh, I sabotaged my boss with ransomware.
That's the one
that I got from the dark web.
In the don't try this at home department.
Do not try this at home. So some of my questions is, and I didn't research the person, but like I hope this person knew what they were doing. Like if Tyler or any one of us said like I'm gonna sabotage my boss with ransomware, I mean you folks would know that, you know, pretty much most of the things you get from the dark web or malware you get from anywhere could likely have a backdoor. Any of these kits. I mean, the research that we've covered over the years and what we've experienced is when you get any kind of kit like this for ransomware or web shells or whatever, botnets, whatever it is usually backdoored by the author in most cases. So when this person who is writing an article in a very journalistic sense, and I forget where this came, Bloomberg, right? And says, I'm going to go get some ransomware from the dark web, and then I'm going to ransomware my boss. Like, there's a lot of ways this can go really, really bad. One, could be backdoored. Two, what if it does work and you don't have the key? Then what do you do, right? What if it spreads? I mean, the list can just go on of, like, the horror show that this could create. And what if you did get permission in a general sense, but something bad happens and someone wants to go after you who you didn't get permission from, right? Because like, how many people can you go ask for permission? You could maybe ask the CISO, you could maybe ask your boss, you could ask the IT director, and they could all be like, yeah, like, cool, like XYZ person, we know that maybe you have taken the necessary precautions, but then ransomwares even a few systems in the environment, and then your legal team and maybe the CEO catches wind and goes, yeah, not only are you fired, but we're suing you and pressing criminal charges, right? Civil and criminal, right?
Yep.
That could just, this is not something that you should do, in my opinion, like ever. It specifically stems from like where
turn into horror.
Right? Like where do you get that stuff from is, I think, what calls into question, right? Permission's one thing. If you're a pen test team, you've tested these tools in a controlled environment. Completely different from just going, yeah, so can I just like buy a ransomware kit because I want to test it out in my boss's computer? Like even in a lab, that's dangerous and you have to take some serious precautions. So, yeah.
I hadn't gotten all the way through it. Like I got quite a ways. It was very long. And I was... initially, it sounded like they were getting the sense of they were doing some research around this and they wanted to see if like any idiot could do it because ransomware as a service, as you know, is a booming market. Like she was saying, I'm an idiot. Like it comes with customer service. Like this is point and click. But from what the summary says, I'm not sure if that was the case or if this went bad. They made this article a little too long for.
They did.
For that kind of a headline.
It was kind of shrouded in mystery and lots of wordiness, for sure. But even if we just go off the headline,
what could go wrong?
Word of caution to our listeners: like, don't try this at home or at work, right? Unless,
no.
I mean, unless you're being trained in malware research, right, and you know how to set up the appropriate environments.
I'm thinking
some of the
if you get past thought
super
exercise,
sophisticated,
yeah.
It is, for sure.
This is
I'm kind of curious about Lee's number one story. Sudo bug lets non-privileged Linux and Mac OS users run commands as root.
Right.
How is this still happening? Is my first question.
Wait, isn't that what sudo's supposed to do?
Yeah, if you're a proper sudo, yeah.
It's a feature.
Isn't that like working? That's working by design, in my opinion.
if you specify the user ID of -1 or 429.496.7295, and because you can pass a user ID to sudo, it accepts it and lets it work.
But this is old, isn't it?
I mean, it's a 2019 CVE. I was wondering why they were just writing about it now.
Yeah.
That was my other
I want to say we
I think
covered this
because-
last.
I feel like it sounds really familiar.
It does.
Well, I think it's because it just the latest versions of Mac OS 10, 13, 14, and 15 have patches for it, and those just came out like a week or two ago.
So the news story is it's finally patched.
Right.
Right, and also the sudo code itself, 1.8.30, is patched.
Okay.
Oh, well, actually, the fix was introduced in 1.8.26, but I didn't go out and check the timing for those versions to see how far back that was, which is, I think, part of your point.
Yeah, when this one came out, I'm pretty sure every OSCP student were like, let me take the exam right now.
Right.
Well played.
Sudo -1, sudo I'm all done.
The Iowa Caucus buggy app.
Yes.
As soon as I caught wind of this, I'm like, no, it's hackers. And they're like, no, they trace it back to like buggy software. I'm like, no, it was hackers. Like people say that at first, and then they find out it was hackers.
Or even the other direction where they said that it wasn't hacked, it just didn't work. I'm like, but that's a denial of service. How do you know that's not hackers? But the other question that I had about the article, and let me ask you this.
Well, let me ask you this:
Okay.
what is the context? The Iowa Caucus. What's going on here with the voting and the app and all that stuff?
Oh, so what happened this past Monday night was they had the Iowa caucus's primary election kind of thing in Iowa. And there's 1,700 locations where they have it. So in order for each of those 1,700 locations to get all the information into a central, the Iowa state Democrats, so they can get the information out to the media very quickly, they gave a mobile app to each of those caucus locations. So that way, as soon as it ended, it's supposed to be around 9 p.m., they just go into the app, type in the information, and it's sent, and it's all going to be updated probably by 10 p.m. or so. Didn't work.
Except
Gotcha.
it didn't work.
Gotcha.
Right.
Didn't work for a number of reasons.
And when they announced it, they spent a whole lot of spin on the capturing of stuff with a photograph or paper records to back up the application. And when I was reading about this, one of the things I kept seeing is it was too hard to install and too hard to use, so people gave up.
in addition to that, they didn't do any training for people and didn't think of the idea that somebody might not have a smartphone.
Yikes.
No.
Well, and there's other layers to it because apparently, if they couldn't get the app to work, they were supposed to call into a number to report, and somehow that number was published and was put out saying, "Hey, everybody, if you want to screw things up, call this number." So they were getting DOSed by not even
The
being able to
opposing
get
party was calling that number, right?
perhaps.
Well, plus when
Well,
they,
that's the article the headline
Okay, it was. Yeah.
Can we say perfect
I don't know if
storm?
it's true or not, but
yeah, and then when the app stopped working, they had 1,600 people trying to call that number that wasn't expected to be used very much.
Right. And the app was written by a company called
Shadow.
the Shadow Corporation.
And
interesting.
But what?
I think it'd be interesting to find out who owns Shadow. A friend of mine was vehemently insisting it was owned by Clintons.
Yeah.
I didn't research it, but I'm wondering,
No,
was that why they're doing security by obscurity to keep that potential questionable ownership under wraps, whoever it is?
I don't think it's owned by the Clintons, but it was.
Yeah, I don't want to say because I don't want to die.
Right.
I just said, I'm just saying what he was saying. I also said I didn't verify it, but
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's,
There is a
the
tie.
parent company ownership had anything to do with what went wrong.
Well, the tie is that there were developers from the Clinton campaign and the Obama campaign that, did this kind of thing, created a company to build apps, and that they got bought by Shadow, I think, and Shadow got bought by somebody else. So, yeah, there are
That
ties to
sounds
the
more
Clintons
reasonable.
and Obama.
Gotcha.
But one of the other questions that I had in here, can I just go out and buy an application, from the App Store or anything like that, and give it to a security company and say, here, can you test this for me? If I just buy an instance of the app.
Yeah, because that was in the article, right?
Right.
The journalist got a hold of the app.
It's supposedly legally, so we'll assume that.
Sent it to researchers for analysis.
Yes.
I don't see why not.
But do you own that app to analyze it?
There's probably copyright or leasing or SLA violations.
But you're not copying it. You're analyzing it.
Yeah, but it's kind of like we got a sticker on our laptop. If you open up the back, voids the warranty type of thing.
Yeah, so you're voiding the warranty on the app.
Maybe.
Some EULAs prevent, restrict reverse engineering or otherwise doing that without permission.
Yeah, but I don't know. It's a good question.
It's never stopped us before.
It's a good question for our attorney friends to be quite honest.
Yeah, no,
I don't think it. From what recent interviews and conversations we've had with attorneys that play in the cyber realm, lack of a better term, right? My guess, not being an attorney, is that that would not prevent you or anyone from reverse engineering software, whether you own it or not. I mean, you could get into trouble if you're trying to, like for video games or other things, reverse engineer it with the intent of bypassing the license or stealing the intellectual property and then profiting from it. That I could see some issues with, right? But if you're just looking for vulnerabilities, again, I mean, listen to our previous interviews, right? I don't think that's an issue. Although it could be. Not a lawyer. Just throwing it out there. Don't take my legal advice.
I also heard that the back end that it was talking to is no longer in place. It's been taken down.
Well, yeah.
How did they deploy it? I mean, did they put it up in one
the
of
App Store?
App stores?
Oops.
You don't. For Android, you don't need to. Anyone can just.
You can sideload it.
Right. You can sideload it. Although Tyler's smiling because then you have to potentially allow unsigned packages to be installed on your Android device, which don't do that. That's bad. Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah. Well, just install it on your Huawei device. It'll be okay.
It'll be fine. Oh, that was the other story we had. The high silicon chips. They released a proof of concept. These are actually manufactured by Huawei.
What?
Yep. And they had backdoors in them. And
There's
the process for it was like, there's like 8 steps that they outline. It wasn't just as simple as there was a back door. You had to make a connection to a port and then get data. It's a whole thing. But fortunately for everyone, they published proof of concept code.
How nice.
Yes.
Tyler had a couple interesting stories, which I know about since I was helping Lee help Tyler get it all into the wiki. There's a couple of stories about Twitter. Anyone in particular you'd like to highlight, Tyler?
I mean, I guess we want to highlight a risk for users. Like Twitter says an attacker used the API to match usernames to phone numbers.
Yeah.
Again, this is not an unknown tactic, and it's one that is not widely known but is commonly used. So people don't quite realize, again, the information you're giving to either social media for maybe two-factor or for verification purposes, or that is required to be on file for certain things. There are ways and creative ways that we've come up with to pull information out of those to make correlations across multiple platforms. So those connections, even though all these places are trying to be very, very sneaky, with a lot of the things that you're able to pull out through programming, it's getting easier. Now, this one's interesting because they use the API. Your ability to use the API
Tyler,
is going to be limited by certain things. So.
Instagram had a similar thing, right? Similar issue.
Yep.
And I don't know if they fixed it or not, right?
Yeah.
Kind of. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have to just do things different. And again, a lot of this goes back to the API. You could do this with the GUI, pretty much always. But the API itself, there's some very specific programming around that to actually make it do it in the way you'd need to make all the numbers come
you
out.
mean like bypass?
Now,
You mean bypass quotas in the API?
That's one real big piece. Or maybe they're paying for quotas. Maybe there's some kind of an ad data or ad network that has the ability to query things at a high volume.
Interesting.
But
yeah,
typically
quotas
those
I mean,
fields
programmatically, it like, and YouTube don't listen to this, but programmatically you can get around quotas, right?
Yep.
And the quota, I mean, if it's tied to your key, that's different because you can change IP addresses all day long. But those queries that are tied back to your key, then you've got to program very differently around that. What I like when you my friend Bob steps outside the APIs and just does scraping is then it's tied to an IP address, and we know how to rotate those pretty easily. Actually, I think we've talked about it. When you spin up a Lambda function, it gets a new IP address every time, potentially.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because the phone number piece is typically when you do that, the phone number piece in a couple different ways that you're doing it is only providing a certain set of numbers and the rest of it's obfuscated. The way that they were doing with this is leveraging the friend piece where you could have, I think it was people could find you based on a phone number and not just like your name or user account. And so, if you had parts of a phone number, you could correlate those particular pieces based on your privacy settings. So from the API, obviously, they were able to do a few additional things with that. And that sucks because that means there's a ton of phone numbers they got, and or Twitter's probably going to close this nice little loophole here.
Well, in Twitter, I believe is the one, it makes you have a unique phone number for every account. It does. Yes, it does.
Yes.
I know because I've had to spin up Google Voice numbers for different Twitter accounts.
But the way it was exploited was there's an option setting where you can say, allow people who know my phone number to discover my Twitter account. So it was exposing the phone number, and you could turn that off. And I believe Twitter has fixed it, but you had to set the setting to enable it, and I believe it was only available on Android. It's still, that doesn't make it any better.
I mean, I'm curious if that ties any of that research or any of that activity was tied around the Super Bowl stuff that came out for Twitter.
Yeah.
I hadn't finished reading that article, but I'm still not sure what they like. Either someone saved up a whole bunch of Twitter accounts and like hacked them all at once and have been saving them to do this one thing, or I don't know. That leads a lot of questions. If the NFL Network's been like compromised for that long and they've been sitting on them just waiting for the Super Bowl, like, all right,
I can see
should
that, though.
narrow it down to who's behind that. There's not that many people with motivation for that.
Probably somebody from the Patriots organization.
So
I was going to say Russia, but
the accounts, when the accounts were discovered, the reason they were accessed is because the security wasn't set up right on them to begin with, and the fix was simply to, enable two-factor and do some of the basic security things, and they were no longer compromised. The question is, why
these guys are making millions?
People do this to begin with?
They have social media like experts.
Right, you're going the same place I'm going, Tyler. We thought they had expert advice, right?
Well, whether they took it or not, it's a different thing.
I mean, if they don't have expert advice, like, reach out to the experts here. We would all love some football tickets, and we would provide some expertise at a very reasonable rate for you.
Absolutely. I'll second that.
Take note, any other professional teams and or sports.
Yes. Mine are limited to New England, but,
Oh, Paul. You and those Patriots. Come on.
I didn't say all New England sports teams. Support my teams.
That makes it better.
Right? I support my teams. What is the Charming Kitten Hackers? I saw this headline, but I admittedly did not dig into them. Because your headline says impersonates journalists in phishing attacks. My headline, I thought, said something slightly different, but if I added that story
Yours said something different?
Iranian
like,
hackers
I was reading
targeting
through it.
Iranian hackers targeting journalists in new phishing campaign.
Impersonating a New York Times journalist. The phishing attacks are the work of Charming Kitten, also known as Phosphorus, APT-35, or Ajax Security Time.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing novel in here, and the fact that they're like calling this out as, social engineering as a journalist, like I'm still trying to figure out like what the point of the article was, other than they seen a phishing attack, a specific one, and then they reported it.
Yeah,
everything in here is very, very common.
But were they trying to phish journalists by impersonating other journalists, or were they trying to phish other people by impersonating journalists, or both?
This one, the target for this one was phishing journalists from journalists.
I gotcha.
So, and apparently it may have worked if they hadn't have slipped up and put their current employment at one of the journalist place where they were claiming to be from.
Oh, and someone checked, basically.
Yeah, so they got the pretext off. But yeah, reading through it, there wasn't anything interesting in it other than the fact that, I'm not sure why they don't think this would be always a thing. This is a half-ass pretext and kind of some sloppy social engineering, to be honest. But journalists are going to be one of the first places to be targeted because they're always getting into all of the skeletons and dirt in the closet. If you want to break a story or have intel on something, where are you going after? So I'm not sure what the point of the story was. Other than they're trying to link it to APT. Great. It's the Iranians. Yeah, we know they're after us.
Yes. Google had an interesting, I don't know if this was a vulnerability necessarily, but it was certainly a bug that if you use Google's takeout service, and it has nothing to do with food delivery, you can basically recover all of your data from one or more specific Google services and download that in one big lump sum.
That sounds like a good
Although,
idea.
I don't know if you can do that with all of your YouTube videos. I don't remember because I remember trying it.
It can be under the GDPR stuff.
GDPR, yeah. GDPR definitely fuels some of this.
Yeah.
That one.
I think they had to make that part of the full export suite, and there's a whole setting. That's why sometimes they say it takes, this can take up to 30 days or something to pull your data back.
Oh,
and I've actually
so they
pulled my data back once to see what was in there.
So they did add that, because that goes back to our previous conversation about writing scrapers and avoiding any kind of filters. In any case, YouTube, don't be listening. But this particular bug is, I did a Google takeout of maybe my Google Docs or any Google service, and lo and behold, I got someone else's videos in my takeout. Oops.
And they're not really saying how many records, which is another interesting. They're being fairly. Looks like they're trying to downplay this one quite a bit, and maybe it wasn't serious. But you think about getting someone else's photos, especially a large amount of them. If you're doing a takeout, you're doing a comprehensive pool usually. That could be either incriminating evidence, that could be private. That seems like a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Somebody do the math. What's
anything else.
0.01 of 1 billion?
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, though. Google Takeout does not have an API that's open to the public. Like, the last time I looked, you had to physically log in and access the takeout service. There was no publicly accessible or documented API for Google Takeout, as far as I can remember.
All right, I did the math. It's 10 million.
Right.
That's a lot of people.
It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of people, a lot of data.
But it's small. It's only 0.01% of our users.
Right. That's still a lot of people.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it alludes to the fact that there may be an API, but I don't see anybody that's actually written anything around it. I mean, either way, that's a lot of data, and I'm not sure. So it was a very small amount of time. I think it was 5 days.
Gotcha.
So still,
but that's the fact
that.
But that's the fact they should have promoted that it was only for 5 days, right? It's not like this was sitting out there and it had an open API. And oh, by the way, everyone was just pulling your own data, Because what I would do is pull my own data over and over and over again and see if it was different every time and I was getting other people's stuff. Right?
And it was only videos, not photos.
Interesting.
So what kind of coding error is that you coding people?
A compression problem?
Something in the type. Well, no, it would be in the type of data, right?
I would think.
So the logic that's specific to grabbing the videos and putting the videos, they give you a compressed archive. I think it's a .zip from Google.
I wonder if it's a MIME type or a magic bit header that they put inside of that as they're doing the compression or the rendering even.
But how did it cross people's sessions and accounts, though? That's the interesting part. Like, how does Tyler and I have accounts, and I'm downloading all the videos from my account? How does it go? Oh, by the way, this video, that was Tyler's, but it's part of your archive now, Paul. That session handling is the interesting part.
Unicode or maybe Little Indian, Big Indian mess up.
Something.
A write buffer.
I love the concept of Little Indian versus Big Indian mess up.
Because no one's ever dealt with that on this show.
Yeah, I know, right?
No one's ever been burned by that.
Yeah, I hate it when the bytes are in the wrong order. Oh my god,
that's the worst.
Bite me, dude.
It really bites.
As I say in my class, it is not about bit order; it is about the byte order.
It's really about the nibbles, though.
It is.
I'm just gonna say it's all about the nibbles.
Oh, don't be talking those dirty nibbles to me.
I think we're all tired.
We got some other
this is
stories.
really slow for as many awesome news stories as we have.
I know, right? Come on, let's pep it up here.
I know. It's like it's slow motion.
Another one.
XCA engineer goes on trial for massive leak. Anyone?
Had a problem with his leg bag? I mean, what?
You gotta go. You gotta go.
Let's say our Slack channel is pretty clean until one of those stories comes up, and
right, then it leaks all over the Slack channel.
Yeah. So there are two links in Tyler's story about it, because one is directly to the Wall Street Journal, which is behind a paywall, and the other one is an archive that doesn't have the paywall in front of it.
Just FYI.
Oh,
So, yeah.
I know. Since no one wants to talk about the CIA leaks, the Department of Energy adds Ativo decoys for critical infrastructure security. I just want to say, and I see Tyler's face as I say this, if you're defending critical infrastructure and you think it's a good idea to put decoys, which I'm not opposed to. I'm really not opposed to putting deception decoys or honeypots in ICS environment. However, in that environment,
I love some honey.
Super important that there's procedures and everyone knows what's a decoy and what is not. So in other words, if you need to do something mission critical, oops, I did that on the decoy rather than the actual valve that was going to, prevent something really catastrophic from happening. Provided you've accounted for that scenario, why would you publicize, and I don't want to certainly knock Ativo for this. It's more on the Department of Energy that if you're implementing a program, which, yes, you should have a heightened state of awareness in protecting industrial control systems, especially if you're the Department of Energy, but why would you just call out and say, not only are we going to use deception, but we're going to use this specific vendor? Now you've just essentially, this is my opinion, and rant, that now if you're sitting there as an attacker, maybe as part of another nation state that wants to attack U.S. infrastructure, you're like, I'm going to eat some caviar and drink some vodka, and then wait a second, or hold on. The Department of Energy, first of all, they're going to use decoys. So all those attacks and maybe already implants I have into ICS systems, I should go look for some decoys. Secondly, the specific decoy they're going to implement comes from this vendor. Now there's people that are going to attack that vendor to get a hold of their stuff, or even better, I can't believe it, is you're going to go to Ativo. Don't do this. If you're like Russian or attacking, don't do this. Even U.S. don't do this. You're going to go to Ativo's website. You're going to pull their customer list, and you're going to go break into their customers, and you're going to go try and get the Ativo code so that you can analyze it to promote your attacks into industrial control systems. I get the whole PR thing and the marketing thing, but I just put my evil hat on and go, I don't know about that.
So there's a slight
I'll take
possibility.
you one step further, Paul.
Well,
As a customer, we're not supposed to allow them to put our site information in their customer list on their website.
Right.
The fact that Lawrence Livermore bought something from these guys isn't supposed to be published, and yet here they are publishing this. It must have been a really big contract that got congressional approval or something, because then it would have been in the federal record and it would have been out.
So they're basically providing a free testing ground so that you can build and test your exploits against hardware that you know is in a particular environment that is very sensitive, and other customers are using this, and you're going to do this for what? Because you've advertised their honeypots, so you're obviously not going to sit and watch real adversaries do anything other than test their code.
Those in the deception space, Tyler, would be very offended at your use of the word honeypot. Just saying. I'm just saying what they're thinking right now. Saying what they're thinking.
The lady down at the bar would be offended of that too, but she...
Or, going back to our earlier discussion, there's a slight chance, maybe, that this is disinformation.
Ooh, I love this.
Maybe it's not a TiVo devices that are out there.
Maybe. I mean, if it was anybody other than Department of Energy, I would say that's probably freaking awesome, and that's a really ingenious idea, and maybe.
There's a lot of pressure on DOE regarding protection of critical infrastructure, which is largely SCADA and ICS systems.
Yep.
I would not have expected Pacific Northwest National Lab to take the lead.
What is Pacific?
Labs that are better at this.
So Lee, you're in.
There's like three better I can think of off the top of my head just from like not even thinking.
Yeah.
What role does Pacific Northwest National Laboratory play in terms of the Department of Energy in protecting critical infrastructure?
The only thing I could think of is they have a collaboration with Bonneville Power, which is up near them.
Gotcha.
Which is also feeds into WAPA, the Western Area Power District.
The other way it works. The other way it works.
Research and hunting and even critical infrastructure incident response through like DHS collaboration with DOE is not within any of those labs. So again, like, where's the expertise coming to build the honeypot in the first place? Are they just deploying this as like, here's how we deploy it in the wild, and like, are you putting additional logging? Like, what kind of additional things are being considered as they're deploying a full honeypot?
Well, PNNL does have expertise in the honeypot detection space. Lots of it.
It's not a honeypot.
I just wasn't sure about the tie to ICS.
Oh yeah, an ICS honeypot, right?
Yeah. So, but I mean, I wish them well. I hope they come up with something really killer. I'm just a little worried about the publicity.
Well, but I mean, it could be like, how much of a secret is this, right? Like how easy, like in terms of compartmentalizing information, how much of a secret is the fact that we're going to use deception to protect critical infrastructure, and maybe certain areas of the government are using this particular vendor? I mean, really, how much of a secret is that? So maybe someone made the decision that it's not classified, it's not a secret, and so we might as well use it as, for a PR effort.
And we have no idea where they're going to deploy them.
True. But if I'm an attacker, I'm gonna that also
in the DOE IP space, hopefully.
Yeah, but I mean that also assumes that you're going to be able to develop a method to detect them, and how much effort are you going to put into that anyhow?
And
maybe they already have.
I mean, space is worldwide, by the way. It's not just in America.
Yeah, and the other thing too is attackers likely and I have no idea if they do or not, but likely have an awareness and perhaps tools and techniques that can detect decoys or not do something to a decoy to trip an alarm, because this isn't new technology, in other words, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's at least half a dozen companies in the deception market that are likely already selling to critical infrastructure in some capacity, right? So this is probably already in the playbooks of attackers, so they therefore made the decision that it really doesn't matter. Attackers are going to do this anyway, right? Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to see both sides.
All
Be
right.
crazy, man. Hey, are we ready to take this out?
Let's take it out.
Joff.
Well, but
take us-
one funny thing before we take it out.
All right.
During the course of our news story, a buddy of mine pinged me that he discovered his Vizio TV was doing port scans on his laptop.
Interesting.
So then he found out how to secure your Vizio TV, and the information was only up to a 2015 model, and he has a 2019 TV. So his new project is building a DMZ for his TV set. I just thought, crap.
That's
I was
interesting.
pleased he detected it, by the way. I was really proud of him. He's not per se a cyber guy.
I
I've
have
been
not
dumping
heard.
Vizio firmware for a substantial amount of time because there was interesting stuff on there to begin with, but port scanning was not within inside of that function. So
That's.
Yeah.
I have not seen a whole ton of malware reside on televisions. Maybe.
Yeah. It's basically scanning his network for services and reporting them back to Vizio, and it's apparently reporting what it's doing, what you're watching on it, as well as your other devices. So I'm thinking they're trying to discover what your other smart devices are doing and reporting it back to Vizio.
Oh, so that's not
So
malware. That's a.
Facebook just bought a service and launched a service that is using TVs to send data back about what you're watching.
Yes.
Yeah, that's in one of my stories somewhere.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, isn't that what was the name of that company that used to collect it off the set-top boxes for people, what they were watching?
Yeah.
Except that was an opt-in scenario.
Yeah, Facebook gets the patent to track users' television viewing. It doesn't say exactly how.
You know what I struggle with too, in modern TVs, trying to turn off all of those smart features or remove apps. Like, it's really hard. Like, you can't physically. Like, I go on some of the newer Samsung TVs. Like my in-laws just got one, and like you can't remove what is the default TV app on Samsung TV? You can't remove it.
Yeah, I've noticed that too.
Right?
Yeah.
And it really wants to connect to your. Now I just want to disconnect them all from the network.
Right.
Now he
So
sees the
those
light.
Those ports have the ability to do interesting things on different ports using different protocols. So even though that port is a standard internet network port, the management and maintenance interface also runs through that same port. You just have to know how to port knock that, and you get some interesting functions out of it.
Well, and also, even if you did disconnect, like not connect your TV to your network via Ethernet and or Wi-Fi, HDMI CEC is kind of scary. So if I can...
ridiculous.
Right? Whatever device is connected to it, like there's a data channel between your TV and your Fire Stick or your NVIDIA Shield or whatever it is. That could those devices are then connected to the network. So I'm kind of interested for like the next Black Hat or some other talk where someone rips apart CEC and figures out how insecure it is. It's already a really crappy protocol because like sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and then you get a firmware update and it works completely different, and it's kind of scary.
I mean, those
really
cables
need
have
Ethernet over
been
HDMI?
used and weaponized for a while.
Yeah. But on that note, I really think I should take us out because it feels like it's about the end of Security Weekly.
I agree, Joff.
It is. Thanks for indulging me.
Thank you very much, everyone, for listening and watching. Thanks, guys, for participating. Thanks to all of our guests for this episode. Joff, take us out.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to Security Weekly this week. I'd like to say a huge shout out to my students in London, especially you, Adam. And don't forget to visit the wiki, wiki.securityweekly.org. 10 ways to protect your online digital life is one of my blog entries. Later. Bye.